Elisa Simpson was a 31-year-old woman whose understated beauty concealed a silent strength shaped by years of daily battles. In the bustling alleys of Manhattan, amid honking horns, rushing footsteps, and lost stares, she served hot dogs with a smile more flavorful than the ketchup and mustard that adorned the buns. A graduate in economics from NYU, she never imagined her professional life would end up here, between sizzling grills and carefully counted change. But her dreams weren't dead. They were just in a coma, waiting for a sign of life. And that sign came on an ordinary Monday morning, when her phone vibrated. The screen read, "Unknown number," but the voice on the other end was from the HR department of New York's biggest tech company. An interview invitation. Elisa nearly dropped the bun from her hand. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. Assistant to the feared and respected Chief Financial Officer, David Espinoza. That night, Elisa barely slept, overwhelmed with the anxious hope of someone who has waited too long to believe again. She spent the early hours buried in old spreadsheets, market summaries, and rehearsed every possible answer in her mind. Ethan, her 10-year-old son, noticed the sparkle in her eyes and hugged her tight before bed. "You got this, Mommy." Ethan was her greatest support, her reason to keep fighting, even with the daily struggle of managing diabetes and affording the expensive medications that consumed much of her income. The small apartment they shared in Harlem was already saturated with hope. On the morning of the interview, Elisa put on her best outfit, a navy blue blazer she had bought at a stylish thrift store in Brooklyn, and pinned her hair back with care, as if every neatly arranged strand were a silent prayer to the future. She boarded the subway with a mixture of faith and nerves. When she arrived at Juno Technologies, her eyes lifted to see the 50 floors of glass and steel piercing the sky. It felt as if destiny itself was watching from above, quietly cheering her on. She passed through reception, checked in, and stepped into the mirrored elevator. As the doors closed, she realized she wasn't alone. There was a tall man in a dark gray suit, absorbed in his phone. She recognized his face from finance magazines. David Espinoza. A chill ran down her spine, but she still managed a timid, "Good morning." He didn't respond, his eyes glued to the screen as if she were invisible. Elisa took a deep breath. "Nothing will take my smile away today," she thought. It was her secret mantra to survive the world's indifference. The interview felt like a minefield disguised as a boardroom. Elisa faced direct questions, stern looks, and the sharp silence of a table full of analysts. But in the end, her authenticity spoke louder. Not only did her answers reveal her technical knowledge, but her empathy and life story touched even the most skeptical manager. 3 days later, the long-awaited email arrived. "Congratulations, Elisa Simpson. Welcome to the team." Ethan jumped on the couch when he heard the news, and she cried, not from sorrow but from relief. For the first time in a long while, life was giving her a chance. She had no idea what lay ahead, but she was ready to pay the price of a new beginning. In her first days, Elisa realized that working with David Espinoza would be like trying to dance on a floor of thorns. He was demanding, cold, and rarely offered more than a curt nod. Still, she found a way to maintain her composure and inner peace. She treated him with politeness, answered with precision, and never ever let discouragement show. The atmosphere was tense but functional. David seemed to test her every day. as if waiting for her to break. But she didn't break. On the contrary, each new challenge was met with double the effort. Her past on the streets, her experience selling hot dogs, had given her something the others lacked: ironclad resilience and an invincible heart. Then, a month after her hiring, came the bombshell. The company required an intensive training program in Mexico. At the factory's headquarters, Elisa would have to travel for 15 days. Ethan cried when he found out he'd be without his mother, but he promised to be strong. And so, on a Friday morning, she boarded the flight to Monterrey, with a small suitcase, a tight heart, and a new pair of shoes she had bought in installments. What she didn't know was that David Espinosa would also be there. During the first few days, he watched her from a distance, like a wolf studying its prey, or a general evaluating a new soldier. There was something in the way she devoted herself to work that began to stir something in him. But David was a man armored in arrogance, and Elisa a woman who still believed that kindness could break down walls. Did you enjoy this first part? Curious to know what's going to happen during this training in Mexico? Then go ahead and subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapters of this beautiful and unexpected story. And tell us in the comments, what kind of romance would you like to see here? Love triangles, second chances, impossible stories. Your opinion will guide the next tales on the channel. The humid heat of Monterrey clung to the skin like a memory too stubborn to forget. Elisa stepped off the company shuttle with sharp eyes but a distracted heart. The city was vibrant, a complete contrast to the cold silence that had settled in David since the trip began. In the corridors of the factory floor, she walked with clipboards and lowered eyes, trying to avoid confrontations and uphold the professional demeanor she had fought so hard to build. Her performance caught the attention of local management, and soon whispers began to circulate about the intelligence and determination of the new assistant from the New York office. Meanwhile, David watched everything in silence, from behind meetings and reports, feeling strangely unsettled by the recognition Elisa was beginning to receive. At night, while her colleagues socialized at the bar, Elisa preferred to head upstairs and listen to Ethan's voice on the phone. "Mommy, Grandma Marie made pancakes and sent you a kiss," the boy would say. And that simple gesture was the highlight of her days. It was on a Thursday, after an intense visit to the assembly line, that the local board hosted a special dinner on the hotel rooftop. Elisa didn't want to go. She was tired and emotionally drained, but a coworker insisted, saying it would be good for networking. She gave in. She wore a light black dress, her hair pulled back into a loose bun, soft makeup, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. As she stepped into the amber-lit room, she saw David at a distance, alone, holding a glass of wine. His eyes locked on her as if he'd been waiting for that moment. She pretended not to notice, sat among her colleagues and tried to relax. The conversation was pleasant, the wine helped, and for the first time since arriving, she truly laughed. Until she heard footsteps behind her, and a voice that slipped into her senses like an old perfume. "Would you care to join me for a glass?" Elisa hesitated. Reason said no, but her heart whispered, "Why not?" They sat at a side table, away from the group, where the music was just background noise to the tension between them. David was different. Less arrogant, more present, almost vulnerable. Elisa spoke little at first, But after a few sips of wine, she began to open up. She spoke of Ethan, of the hardships in Manhattan, of the constant fear of failing as a mother. David listened in silence, his eyes fixed on her like someone reading an ancient book. He shared a little of himself too. The absence of his father, the quiet end of his marriage, the emptiness of Sunday dinners. "I don't trust anyone," he whispered. Without thinking, Elisa replied, "Neither do I. But sometimes we get tired of being alone." They toasted to the improbable and laughed like two teenagers in their senior year of high school. The conversation drifted deep into the night, and the masks they had worn since day one at work seemed to melt off the table, softened by drink and shared loneliness. The invitation came not in words, but in glances. They took the elevator up together, silent, but with hands almost touching, as if the electricity between them didn't obey the rules of common sense. In the room, the lights were left off. There was no urgency, no desperation, only surrender. David was gentle, patient, and Elisa, caught between longing and fear, allowed herself to let go. Every touch seemed to apologize for all the cold words he'd ever said. She felt seen, truly seen for the first time. When their bodies finally separated and the silence of the room returned, David held her hand for a few minutes before falling asleep. Elisa, still awake, stared at the ceiling, trying to understand how someone so hard could hold so much tenderness within. And in that moment she thought, maybe there's a whole man inside this broken man. But sunrise would soon remind her, not all tenderness is made to last. David woke up before the sun rose. He was already dressed, suitcase packed, eyes fixed on his phone screen. Elisa sat up in bed, the sheet pulled over her body, trying to break the silence. "Good morning," she ventured, with a smile that begged for reciprocity. But his response was a cold slap. "It was a very pleasant night. That's all." Those words fell like a sentence. Cold, distant, cruel. Elisa felt the blood drain from her cheeks. She tried to say something, searched for a trace of the man from the night before, but all she saw was the old David. Impersonal, armored, hostile. He left without looking back, leaving behind not just a messy hotel room, but also the heart of a woman who, against all logic, had believed in something real. Elisa cried in silence, covering her face with her hands, wishing she could erase the memory of that night. And above all, she hated herself for having allowed herself to feel. The remaining days in Mexico were a minefield. Elisa avoided David's gaze, and he, as if nothing had ever happened, treated her with calculated coldness. On the flight back to New York, she sat far from him, pretending to sleep. But she was no longer the same woman who had boarded the plane days earlier. There was a new weariness in her, a kind of sorrowful maturity that only comes with deep disappointment. Weeks later, she began to feel strange. Morning nausea, extreme fatigue, heightened emotions. A drugstore test confirmed what she feared the most. And at the same time, what could be the greatest miracle of her life? She was pregnant. She cried for hours in the bathroom. Ethan was asleep in the next room, unaware of the storm engulfing his mother. Elisa spent days torn over whether to tell David the truth. But something inside her whispered that, despite everything, he had the right to know. And when she told him, she would regret it. The silence in David's office was broken only by the sound of the envelope being placed on his desk. Elisa stood tall, composed, but her heart was imploding. David read the contents slowly, as if the paper burned in his hands. When he finished, he looked at her with icy contempt and let out an ironic sigh. "Congratulations to you, and to the father of the child," he muttered with disdain, handing the envelope back as if disposing of something filthy. Elisa felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. Her body trembled, but her soul rose in a surge of dignity. Without crying, without raising her voice, she turned and walked to her desk. She picked up her bag, calmly removed her ID badge, and placed it on her supervisor's desk. She said nothing to anyone. She walked to the exit with steady steps, like someone who chooses to let the past die behind them. She didn't look back, not even when she passed through the building's revolving door. That version of herself died there. On the crowded subway, Elisa stared out the window as if searching for an explanation in her own reflection. Her head throbbed with memories. The job interview, the training in Mexico, the dinner, David's touch, and later, his soul-killing coldness. She felt foolish for ever believing in the possibility of affection from him. She arrived home in silence. Ethan ran to the door, hugging her tight, saying he had missed her. She held him like someone clinging to life itself. That night, she cried into her pillow, not for David, but for the illusion she had secretly nurtured. Then she decided, it was time to start over. Time to stop trying to fit into a world that had never wanted her. She called Aunt Marie and, with just a few words, asked for help. Her aunt didn't hesitate. "Come, sweetheart. We'll figure it out." The next morning, with the courage of someone crossing a desert alone, she packed 2 suitcases, took Ethan by the hand, and left for Connecticut. Let the past remain in New York. Aunt Marie lived in an old house with peeling paint and a flowerless garden. But there peace reigned. The scent of fresh coffee and cake in the oven softened the days, and her aunt's gentle words warmed Elisa's silences. It wasn't easy. Pregnant, unemployed, and with Ethan needing attention, Elisa found herself surrounded by uncertainty. But like every wounded woman, she discovered a strength she never knew she had. She found a job as an assistant in a small local medical office. The salary was modest, but enough to cover the basics. Ethan adjusted well to his new school, made friends, and smiled freely again. At home, Elisa wrote in a journal at night, trying to understand why she still dreamed of David. Sometimes she woke up startled, reliving that morning in the office. Other times she felt anger, not toward him but toward herself. Yet she refused to sink. Every pain was a step, and she had chosen to climb. Noah's birth was like thunder in a summer midnight. It was pouring rain that night, and each contraction felt like more than just the arrival of a baby. It felt like the birth of a new woman. Elisa gripped Aunt Marie's hand as she sweated and cried, screaming between groans of pain and whispered prayers. When the first cry echoed through the delivery room, she broke down in relieved sobs. The nurse placed tiny Noah in her arms, and there they were, the dark eyes of David. She sat in silence for minutes, simply watching the boy breathe. So small and yet so complete. "You're going to be strong, my love. You'll grow up loved, even if the world is cruel." Aunt Marie was crying beside her, murmuring prayers of gratitude. In that simple room, with white walls and the smell of disinfectant, a mother rose like a warrior. The pain from before had turned into love. What she had lost could not compare to what she had just gained. Meanwhile, David kept building his empire of silence in Manhattan. Impeccable appearance, tailored suits, always a professional tone. Everything about him screamed control. But at night, in the silence of his glass and concrete apartment, he heard guilt whispering. Not a day passed without Elisa's face appearing in his mind. He tried to drown it out with work, events, investor dinners, but all it took was a minute alone for that memory to return. Her standing in his office, that envelope. He began having nightmares of a crying child lost in a dark room, calling for an absent father. He would wake up drenched in sweat, chest tight. Deep down, something told him he had made a mistake. Not just a professional one, but a deeply human one. He started to question his actions, his decisions, his words. Elisa's look the day she walked away. That look haunted him. She wasn't an opportunist. She was something else. Something he might have felt and denied. One cold December night, David went out alone and walked to the corner where the hot dog stand used to be. The place had changed. A gourmet cafe now stood there. He went in, looked around, saw nothing familiar. When he asked about the woman who once ran the stand, the barista hesitated, then said, "I think she left over a year ago. Someone mentioned she went to live with an aunt. Maybe in Connecticut." David thanked her but stood there, staring out the window as if searching for a piece of himself he had let slip away. For the first time, he felt afraid he had lost something irreplaceable. It wasn't just regret. It was a longing for a life he had never even lived. That woman, with all her sweetness and strength, had left a void in his steel and glass world. And in that moment, he decided he couldn't go on like this. He had to see her, understand her, maybe even ask for forgiveness. David's search for Elisa became an obsession. He discreetly hired a private investigator, giving only what information he had. Full name, former address in New York, job history. Each day, he waited for an email, a call, anything that might bring him closer to the woman he had learned to forget far too late. Deep down, he didn't know exactly what he would say. But he knew he had to see her. Even if it was just to hear from her lips what his conscience already screamed. "You were wrong." The weeks dragged on until, finally, an email arrived in his inbox. Elisa Simpson. Current address confirmed. Bramble Hill, Connecticut. Lives with an older woman named Marie and has 2 children. The second, 1-year-old, is named Noah. David felt his heart stop. Noah. The name echoed in his mind like a divine confirmation. It hurt and illuminated all at once. There was no running now. It was time to face it all. David drove to Connecticut on a gray January afternoon. The road felt longer than it was. His luxury car looked out of place among the town's humble scenery. Porchfront homes, kids on bikes, bare trees dancing with the wind. He parked in front of the small pale blue house, his stomach churning. He was more nervous than he had ever been in any boardroom or negotiation. He took a deep breath. The front door creaked open, and an older woman with white hair and a floral apron eyed him cautiously. "Looking for someone?" she asked firm. "I'm looking for Elisa Simpson," he replied, voice low. There was silence. The woman crossed her arms and scanned him from head to toe. "You're David?" she asked direct. He nodded slightly. "She doesn't want to see you," she said, already beginning to close the door. "Please, just a minute," he whispered. Aunt Marie hesitated, but didn't fully shut the door. "Wait here. I'll ask if she'll hear you out." Inside, Elisa was in the kitchen slicing apples for Ethan's snack when she heard her aunt's voice. A chill ran up her spine. Her name spoken in that tone. She set the knife down and walked slowly to the living room. "Who's here?" she asked. Her aunt hesitated, then replied truthfully, "David." The world seemed to spin. His name echoed inside her like an avalanche. Her heart raced, her knees nearly buckled. She hadn't seen him in nearly 2 years, but she thought of him every day. Of the pain, the humiliation, the night it all began. "What does he want?" she asked, barely audible. "Said he just wants to talk." Elisa stood silent for a few moments. Then she drew a deep breath and lifted her chin. "Let him in." Her voice was firm, even though everything inside her trembled. The time had come to face the ghost. But she was no longer the wounded woman from before. She was standing. She was a mother of 2. She was strong. David stepped inside and immediately felt small in the humble but soulful space. The wooden table, toys on the floor, the smell of cake in the oven. It all spoke of real life, the kind he'd always run from. Elisa entered the room, wearing a floral dress and a look that blended surprise, hurt, and strength. For a moment he was speechless. "You actually came," she said, arms crossed. "Took you 2 years to decide." David swallowed hard. "I didn't know. I wasn't sure," he began. "You were as sure as you wanted to be, David," she cut him off coldly. "You chose to humiliate me, then went on with your life as if I never existed." Her words were sharp. He lowered his gaze. "You have every right to hate me. But if Noah is my son, I want to know. I want to see him." Elisa hesitated, her throat burning. "This isn't about what you want. It's about what he needs." David nodded. "Then tell me, what does he need?" Elisa stayed silent. Even she didn't know the answer. Noah's cry came from the next room, like a divine signal interrupting the tension. Elisa walked over, picked him up in her arms, and returned with the boy pressed to her chest. David looked at the child and felt his world collapse. The dark eyes, the serious expression. It was like looking into a mirror from the past. Noah looked at him with curiosity, then reached out his tiny hand and wrapped his fingers around the stranger's. Something inexplicable happened in that touch. A single tear ran down David's face, slow and uninvited. "He's my son," he whispered, more to himself than to Elisa. She watched in silence. "Yes, and you missed the first year of his life." The words came out hard, but there was no anger in them, only the truth. "You still have time not to miss the rest." David looked at her, then at the baby. "If you'll allow me, I want to be present. Not as a boss, not as a man. As a father." Elisa sat down on the couch, exhausted. "One step at a time, David. One thing at a time." and for the first time there was a small space of hope between them. In the days that followed, David rented a small house in Bramble Hill. He didn't ask to move in with Elisa, didn't invade her space. He simply showed up, picking Ethan up from school, helping with groceries, taking Noah to the pediatrician. He didn't speak of the future or ask for anything. He was just there. Elisa watched in silence. Slowly, she began to soften. First a coffee, then a lunch. Until one night, when Noah had a fever, David spent the entire night on the sofa, the child in his arms, tears in his eyes. "He's going to be okay," he whispered, rocking him as if that was all that mattered. Elisa saw that scene and felt a twinge in her chest. He wasn't the cold executive from New York anymore. He was a wounded man trying to rebuild. And for the first time she wondered, was there still love hiding among the ruins? Or maybe something new, stronger and more real than anything they had before? Time would tell. But in that moment, a seed had been planted. The days passed like pages on a calendar no one wanted to flip too quickly. David kept building, not with promises, but with small, steady gestures, firm as silent bricks. Elisa noticed everything. Her heart always torn between the memory of pain and the present transformation. Ethan, once cautious, began to warm up. One day, he asked David for help on a school project about technological inventions, and David spent the evening explaining concepts patiently, like a father would. Noah also began to smile more when he walked in the door. Every giggle from the baby was a shovelful of dirt covering the past. In that modest house in Bramble Hill, there was more love and redemption than in the skyscrapers of Manhattan. Elisa could feel it. She saw it. But she still wrestled with the shadows of doubt. What if he was just trying to ease his guilt? What if it was temporary? What if she let herself fall and got hurt again? One evening, after putting the children to bed, David and Elisa sat out on the porch. The moon was high, and the silence spoke louder than any music. David looked at her like a man gazing at the sky after a storm. "I hurt you more than I can express. There's no excuse. Only what I choose to do from now on." Elisa listened, steady, but didn't answer right away. The breeze played with her hair, and for a moment, David felt like he was looking at the woman of his life. "You know, I think I started loving you on that trip," he said in a whisper. "But I was too much of a coward to understand. And when I finally did, it was already too late." Elisa swallowed hard. It struck her deeply, but also made her recoil. "You didn't respect me, David. You used me. And then you humiliated me." He nodded, ashamed. "If I have to spend the rest of my life proving I've changed, I will." He meant it. For the first time completely. Elisa began opening her heart slowly, like someone opening an old letter afraid of what they might read. She told him about the days of nausea, the desperation upon seeing the positive test, the sleepless nights debating whether to tell him or not. She spoke of the hidden tears in her pillow, the shame of going back to selling hot dogs after believing in a better future. David listened in silence, his eyes wet. He didn't dare interrupt. Each word from Elisa was a confession, but also a request for healing. She said she had considered not having the baby, but something inside told her that life, even rejected by a father, deserved to exist. And then Noah came. and he changed everything. He saved me from myself, David cried. And I wasn't there, he whispered. Elisa only nodded. There was nothing else to say. But the simple fact that they had shared that pain now placed them on new ground, the ground of mutual vulnerability, where real love tends to grow. On a rainy Sunday morning, David made breakfast while Elisa slept. It was something simple, pancakes and strawberries, but for him it meant everything. When she came down, hair still messy, she found the boys smiling at the table and David wearing a silly apron that read, "Love Chef." They laughed together for the first time in months. After breakfast, he pulled a small box from his pocket and offered it to Elisa. It wasn't a ring. It was a necklace with a pendant of 2 interlocked circles. "This isn't a proposal. It's a symbol that I want to walk beside you, slowly, with respect, with intention." Elisa held the necklace in her hand and felt the weight of that choice. She didn't say yes, nor did she say no, but she placed the pendant around her neck and smiled. Sometimes you don't need to promise the sky. You just need to take steady steps on the earth. And that morning, fertile ground was growing between them. Despite the progress, not everything was poetry. In town, some neighbors started to talk. "Isn't that guy the new dad? I heard he's from New York, and that he disappeared at the beginning." Elisa heard the whispers at the market, in the bank queue, even at Ethan's school. Sharp tongues didn't forgive, and she felt the pressure growing. David noticed and wanted to defend her, but she didn't allow it. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that life answers better than any words. Still, it got to her, and in a moment of doubt, she considered pushing David away again. He understood. "If I have to walk away so you can feel safe, I will. But I want to be clear. My place is with you. With Noah. With Ethan. With you." It was the first time Elisa had heard it so directly. And in that moment, she decided other people's opinions would no longer write her story. God's voice was stronger than any judgment, and he seemed to be writing a new chapter. One spring Saturday, something unexpected happened. Noah, his voice still thick with baby babble, called David Daddy. No one taught him. No one asked him to. Came from him, spontaneous, natural, full of soul. Elisa cried. David froze. Ethan smiled. Aunt Marie, sitting on the couch with her crochet in her lap, simply nodded as if she already knew. That moment sealed something 1,000 words could never explain. That night, Elisa went out to dinner with David for the first time since he came back. A simple restaurant by the lake. There, under the golden lights and the distant sound of a guitar, she held his hand and said, "I don't forgive you yet, but I'm learning to love you again." David kissed her fingers with reverence. There was no rush, no pressure, but there was truth. And where there is truth, love sooner or later finds a home. Summer arrived in Bramble Hill, bringing with it the scent of flowers and the first steps of a new story. David started visiting the town's small flower shop every day, helping Aunt Marie pick out arrangements for Elisa's porch. It wasn't about the flowers. It was about the gesture, about showing he was planting something new there with her. Elisa, in turn, began revisiting old projects, launching a small online financial consultancy that, to her surprise, began gaining traction. David looked after the kids on the afternoons she had clients, and that home, once marked by pain, now echoed with laughter and conversation. At night, when all fell quiet, they'd sit in the backyard and talk about life, sometimes remembering the past, sometimes imagining the future, but most of the time just savoring the present. The now had become the most beautiful place to live. That was where love began to bloom without fear. One day, Elisa received an unexpected invitation from a major financial consulting firm in New York. They wanted her to lead a remote project on financial education for underserved communities, inspired by her videos and articles. The offer was tempting, but it reminded her of a past where power and success came laced with loneliness. David encouraged her. "Don't be afraid to shine. I'll handle everything here. I'm rooting for you." It was different from the coldness of the past. Now he didn't need to control, only support. Elisa accepted the challenge, and soon her routine transformed. Interviews, online events, awards. But she never let any of it pull her away from her children or David. For the first time, she was living the balance she'd always dreamed of. And he was there, applauding each step, as someone who knows that the victory of the woman he loves is also his own. Deep down, David knew. This is where he wanted to be. Beside a strong woman who had won without needing to bow. On a special Sunday, they organized a picnic in the fields with Ethan, Noah, Aunt Marie, and a few neighbors. Everything was light, relaxed, until Ethan, between bites, asked, "Mom, do you think we can be a real family now?" Elisa paused, swallowed the lump in her throat, and looked at David, who already had tears in his eyes. "I think we already are, my love," she replied. And David added, "Family is where you choose to stay, even after 1,000 reasons to run." That phrase lingered in the air like a blessing. Aunt Marie smiled wisely, and even Noah, without understanding much, seemed to absorb the weight of that moment. After that day, Elisa knew her heart was no longer divided. Fear had given way to hope, and disappointment had been replaced by trust, built brick by brick. It was the foreshadowing of something greater. A decision was about to be made, not from the impulse of emotion, but from the certainty of a love refined by time. The following week, David received a call from his old company in Manhattan. They wanted him back for an even higher position, with a multi-million-dollar bonus. It was the chance to rebuild his career with the prestige he once had. But after hanging up, David sat in silence for hours. He looked at the modest house, the toys scattered around, the photos on the fridge, and he knew glory wasn't worth his peace. He told Elisa about the offer and his decision to decline it. "My life isn't there anymore. It's here. With you." She didn't know what to say. She just cried, moved to see that this man had finally understood what was essential. David was no longer the ruthless CEO, but the father, the partner, the man who chose love over pride. And in that choice, he wrote the most beautiful line of his story. Not with speeches, but with surrender, the rarest and deepest language of true love. Their love stopped being a promise and became an act. David began building a small greenhouse in the backyard, with Ethan's help. It was a symbol of something that would grow over time, watered daily, just as love should be between two wounded but willing people. One overcast afternoon, Elisa brought coffee for the two of them and stood watching father and son laugh together. That moment was more powerful than any expensive gift David had ever given. Noah crawled through the garden, and Aunt Marie snapped photos with her old analog camera. Elisa, seated in the rocking chair, looked at it all and felt a peace that hadn't visited her heart in a long time. She realized she was no longer waiting for an apology or some grand gesture. True love, she discovered, proves itself in the details. A shared laugh, an outstretched hand, an "I'll stay" when it would be easier to leave. That's what she had now, and it was all she needed. That very night, David prepared a special dinner in the backyard, with candles, fairy lights in the trees, and a soft soundtrack playing from an old record player. When Elisa arrived, she wore a simple white dress, but looked almost celestial. David knelt before her, not with a ring but holding a key. "This is the key to my heart, and to the home I want to build with you, officially as husband and wife. No rush, no pressure, just truth." Elisa cried, took the key and whispered, "Yes." It wasn't a shouted yes, nor euphoric. It was the kind of yes that comes from those who have fallen and risen, from those who've bled and now choose flowers. In the background the children played, the night was warm, and the future finally began to smile. It was the beginning of the end, the herald of a new eternity. David woke with an unnamed anguish. The sky was clear, but inside him the storm raged on. He wondered every day how things might have been had he made a different decision that morning in Mexico. The memory of Elisa, eyes wet and suitcase in hand, haunted him like a silent ghost. He could no longer pretend that woman didn't exist, that child, boy or girl, was not real. It was no longer pride, it was longing. And there was something deeper he still did not fully understand. A visceral need to fix what he had broken. So he decided to stop running. He shut the laptop, turned off the phone, and drove into the interior of Connecticut, wearing the same clothes he wore on days he felt whole. Destiny was calling. Elisa was ironing in the room next to the kitchen when she heard the crunch of tires on the gravel. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her heart raced before she even looked out the window. It was as if her soul already knew who stood on the other side. When she opened the door, her eyes met David's. She stood frozen. All the memories flooded her. Mexico, the pain, the shame, the disdain. But also the warmth of that night, the easy laughter, how he had touched her hand so gently. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke, until Ethan appeared behind her, and David saw him truly as never before. The boy had his eyes, his build, his soul perhaps. Elisa made space, and David stepped in. But he didn't just enter the house. He began slowly to re-enter their story. They sat at the kitchen table like two survivors of a war they themselves had helped start. David asked for forgiveness, not with rehearsed lines, but with a tremor in his voice that betrayed him. Elisa listened, but there were still thorns. She spoke about the months of despair, the nausea, the birth, the sleepless nights. She spoke of how Ethan was her greatest support, and how Aunt Marie held her hand when she thought of giving up everything. David cried, for the first time without hiding. He said he had spent every day wondering if the child had been born healthy, if the child had his name, his smell. And there, in that simple kitchen, smelling of coffee and clean laundry, two hearts bared themselves. Time hadn't rewound, but it offered a second chance. And Elisa, tired of carrying it all alone, chose to listen with her heart. The following days were confusing, intense, painful. Ethan, with the innocent wisdom of his 11 years, was the one to break the ice. "You're my dad, right?" he asked directly. David couldn't answer with words. He just held him tight, as if the whole world fit in that embrace. And in that hug something was reborn. Noah, small and curious, reached up and David scooped him into his arms. Elisa watched it all with misty eyes, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Aunt Marie, from the other room, whispered a tearful, "Thank God." Things weren't solved yet, but a bridge was under reconstruction. And sometimes the first brick is miracle enough. It was the beginning of something new. David rented a small house nearby to stay for a while. He wanted to be close without invading. As weeks passed, he began taking Ethan to school, helping with Noah during sleepless nights, and joining Sunday lunches with everyone. They started laughing again, sharing movies, simple chores, fresh memories. Love didn't return like lightning, came like a persistent breeze. A touch of hands while washing dishes, a lingering glance on the couch, a comfortable silence as the boys played. Elisa, still cautious, allowed herself to believe, not in the David of the past, but in the man trying to be born before her eyes. And for the first time she felt loved in the right way. Then one late afternoon in the park, the one where they used to take Ethan when he was little, David stopped beside Elisa and said, "Would you forgive me if I said I still love you? That I never stopped loving you, even though I made so many mistakes?" She remained silent, looking at the golden-tinged sky before responding. "Love, David, isn't just a feeling. It's a choice. And I choose to give you this chance despite it all." It was the sweetest kiss in their history. No whine, no false promises, no rush. Just two tired hearts wanting to find rest in one another. And in that instant time seemed to pause, as if even the wind held its breath, not to disturb the moment. With their relationship renewed, came another surprise. Elisa discovered she was pregnant again. She trembled as she showed the test to David, afraid of rejection, of reliving the past. But he just smiled, tears in his eyes. "This time I'll be here. From the very first second," he promised. The coming months were the most intense of their lives. Medical appointments, strange cravings at 3 a.m., house renovation plans, and the challenge of caring for 2 children with a third on the way. It was chaos and love at the same time. And no matter how difficult, they knew they were in this together. For the first time, truly together. The birth came at the start of spring. A girl was born, Emma Grace. And with her, a new version of David and Elisa also came into the world. The delivery room filled with tears, smiles, and promises. Aunt Marie held Noah in her arms while Ethan proudly filmed the moment. Elisa looked at David with eyes swollen from emotion and whispered, "This is our second chance." He responded with a kiss on her forehead and a simple, "Thank you for not giving up on me." Time now seemed to heal, as if every mistake had been necessary to bring them here. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was made of real pain but also tangible miracles. In the months that followed, Elisa and David started a small family business, combining her financial skills and his tech network. They created a platform to help single mothers regain financial independence. Their story appeared in blogs, podcasts, and videos. They became a symbol of new beginnings. But behind the scenes, they remained two lovers exchanging notes on the fridge and laughing at old jokes. David still made coffee the wrong way. Elisa still cried at diaper commercials. And that's what made them real. Because true love isn't perfect. It's faithful, resilient, and everyday. At Emma's first birthday party, David climbed onto a small stage in the garden and took the microphone. With tears in his eyes, he said, "This house, this woman, these kids are my miracle. Thank you, God, for letting me fix what I broke." Elisa embraced him as neighbors and friends applauded emotionally. It wasn't about remarrying. It was about renewing the choice every day. The children danced on the lawn, lantern lights twinkled over the tables, and the scent of cake filled the air. This was how they wanted to be remembered, not for the mistakes but for the new beginning, for the love that insisted on living, even when everything seemed lost. David wrote a book sharing his version of their story titled, "The Second Sunrise." Elisa shyly reviewed each chapter. The book's release was a success. Readers around the world were moved, identified with it, cried. Their YouTube channel gained thousands of subscribers. And what began in pain became art. What was shame turned into testimony. What looked like the end became the beginning. In essence, Elisa and David's story wasn't about betrayal or abandonment. It was about how two broken souls can become whole again when they choose to love with humility. In the silent nights, with their children already asleep, David and Elisa sat on the porch, hand in hand, gazing at the sky. They spoke little. Because when love is real, it doesn't need constant proof. Just needs to be there. Live. Present. Eternal.